So our next panel is moving to look at advanced technology for a better world, and my gosh, that's a wide remit. So I'm delighted that the moderator for this panel is Kylie Sproston. She's a chartered engineer and internationally experienced leader in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology industries, and she has a strong focus on manufacturing. Kylie's currently Chief Executive of Bellberry, which is a private, not-for-profit company that promotes and improves the welfare of research participants and the quality, efficiency and effectiveness of human research projects in Australia. She's also one of ATSE's board members. Kylie was elected as a fellow in 2021. Please make her welcome.
Thank you, Kylie, and apologies about the sound. Hopefully that gets sorted. Actually, first of all, I'd like to just take the opportunity, as many other of the moderators have done, to just add my congratulations to the new fellows. And it's actually really lovely to experience, along with you, this New Fellows Showcase. I was one of the COVID generation, so we didn't have something like this. We had a really lovely online ceremony, but kind of didn't get this opportunity to meet with past fellows, the kind of members of divisions and forums, and of course to meet and make connections with your cohort of fellows. So it's really lovely that a number of us can be along with you this year, and I really encourage you to make those connections and really to participate in the Academy. The divisions are really welcoming. They do some fantastic work. The forums, I think, are the powerhouse that enable ATSE's work with government in particular, and all of it can only be done with your participation. So this panel today, we're going to talk about advanced technology for a better world. And I mean, there's no better topic really for innovators and applied scientists and engineers, because it's all about application and outcomes, not outputs, outcomes. We've talked about the fact that Australia is a nation of innovators. We've shared already this morning lots of metrics around our skills and strengths in discovery and early development. We recognise that Australians have a talent for ingenuity and creative thinking from ancient times to more recent examples. We've got lots of examples of Australian innovations around the world. Cochlear implants, polymer banknotes, Wi-Fi has been mentioned, boomerangs, fish traps. But if I was going to be critical, as we've already heard this morning, though many of these Australian breakthroughs are still worldwide headlines, some of them are somewhat old news. I'm from the life sciences, and life sciences, drugs, biologics, medical devices is a team sport. It is interdisciplinary by its very nature, not only in the kind of early stages of development, but in terms of actually progressing those discoveries through ultimately to the pharmacy shelf. And there are lots of classic case studies in our area. Australia is incredible at discovery and early development, but particularly I think with the reduction of our manufacturing base, we've lost some of the capabilities to scale up manufacturing, and with it the ability to fully commercialise all of our opportunities. But hopefully today we're going to hear some optimistic examples of opportunities and some discussion about how we might be able to address some of those challenges and barriers. I'm delighted to introduce our panel members. First of all, I'd like to welcome Professor Guillaume Lessene to the stage. Guillaume is Head of New Medicines and Advanced Technologies at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute in Melbourne. He leads and led the National Drug Discovery Centre, which provides high-throughput screening to match compounds with biological targets, and that's progressed 3.5 million compounds with matches against 20 different disease areas. He was also the medicinal chemistry lead in a collaboration between WeHi, Genentech and AbbVie that led to the development of Venticlax. Now, for those not in the life sciences, Venticlax was designated in 2015 by the FDA as a breakthrough therapy for a number of different leukemias. It was ultimately then approved in 2016 for chronic lymphocytic leukemia, and then subsequently for a range of other conditions added to that, and has been used in more than 50,000 patients across the world in that time. There's not many in the life sciences that have actually been there at the moment of discovery and have seen inventions all the way to making a difference in patient health. So congratulations, Guillaume, and we're very happy to have you here. Next up, I'd like to introduce Lara Olsen. Lara is an industry-based fellow with experience at Australian Renewable Energy Agency. She's been the global head of BD for Tesla Energy, and she's now the managing director of Southeast Water in Victoria. She's an innovative and inclusive technology leader, has been a key part of multiple sustainability initiatives here and around the world. And in fact, we should talk to you about the big battery and your experience in establishing that here. It was such a huge story in 2017. Next, I'd like to welcome Professor David Taubman, who is an outstanding inventor and entrepreneur whose pioneering work has greatly advanced the field of media compression technology. David is Deputy Head of School Research at UNSW and has commercialised innovations through his company, Kakadu Software, which supports national archives around the world. So another example of Australian ingenuity supporting global usage. He also delivers international impact through his contribution to the development of international standards in his area of expertise. And finally, I'd like to welcome Professor Anna Moore to the stage. Anna is the founding director of the multidisciplinary ANU Institute for Space, and she's at the forefront of Australia's renaissance in space exploration. Anna was instrumental also in the formation of the Australian Space Agency as part of the Australian Government's expert reference group, and has deep experience in multidisciplinary research translation in her area of innovation, which is astronomical instrumentation. Finally, before we start the panel, I also want to introduce 2023's Foreign Fellow, Dr. Sangeeta Bhatia. Sangeeta is Director of the Marble Center for Cancer Nanomedicine at MIT in the US. Adopting methods found in the computer industry, Sangeeta engineers tissues to recreate microenvironments found in the human body. So, for example, she's created microtissues for research in malaria and hepatitis. She's also developed synthetic biomarkers that have enabled the early detection of cancer tumours. I know Sangeeta tried to and was disappointed that she couldn't join us here in person, but we do have a video presentation that we'd like to enjoy before we start our conversation.
Hi, my name is Sangeeta Bhatia. I'm a researcher at MIT who specializes in nanomedicine. In particular, what I'd like to tell you about is the potential role for nanotechnology to detect cancer earlier in patients around the world. Just to get started, I'd like to share with you that the global cancer burden in low and middle income countries represents about 2/3 of cancer deaths today and is projected to only increase over the next decade. The sad reality is that a child with leukemia is largely cured in a high-income country today and will die in a lower middle-income country. And this sort of fundamental inequality due to access to technology is one that I believe can be addressed by inventing new technologies that are focused on this challenge of global oncology. The Sustainable Development Goals for 2030 do address cancer here in the non-communicable disease category. And so this is part of the vision for 2030. Today, 50% of cancer deaths in developing economies are preventable with cancer vaccines, smoking cessation, and screening tests like pap smears. However, we've been interested in creating technologies that could address that other 50%. In particular, we're interested in the potential for earlier detection of cancer to increase survival. You can see in this data that across a wide range of cancers, earlier detection leads to longer survival. And we know in high-income countries that screening technologies like mammograms for breast cancer and colonoscopies for colon cancer can in fact have impact on long-term mortality. However, this requires infrastructure that may not be available worldwide. And so we've been interested in whether a technology could be developed that could be as easy as a paper strip, like a pregnancy test, or more recently, like an antigen test for COVID. So in this movie, what you'll see is we've created a nanotechnology, a nanosensor particle, which is 100 nanometers in diameter. So it's 1,000 times finer than a human hair. It's been injected into the bloodstream, and it's leaking into a surrounding tumor through the leaky vessels of a tumor. These nanosensors are designed to detect enzymes that tumors produce called proteases. Once these nanosensors are activated, they liberate a flurry of molecular fragments that are 5 nanometers. These molecular fragments are so small that the kidney can be leveraged to concentrate them and put them into the urine. It turns out the kidney is actually an excellent 5 nanometer filter and concentrator. So the dream that we're building towards is one where a patient would get a shot and wait 1 hour and do a urine test on a paper strip. You could visualize that paper strip with a smartphone and then even send that to a remote provider who could make a cancer diagnosis at a distance. This would potentially not require steady electricity or physicians on site as part of a screening paradigm. Now, in animal models in the laboratory, this is working exceedingly well. We also have a startup company that is in phase 2 clinical trials to try and bring this dream into a reality. This is really just one example of a technology that I believe could be created to address global oncology. I'd just like to leave you with the idea that we need more diverse minds engaged in this activity, and not just the ideas of delivering existing technologies with innovative policies, but also creating innovative new technologies that can be delivered in developing economies. Thank you very much for your attention. Have a wonderful day.
I think that was wonderful to hear that, and I'd actually like now to pass to our panellists to also describe the work that they do in advancing technology for a better world. Guillaume.
Thank you. Thanks. First, it's really an honor to be part of the Academy. I was trained in chemistry, and funnily enough, I have 2 degrees in France, engineering, and a PhD. And for the last 26 years since I left France to the US and now Australia, my engineering degree has disappeared from my resume. But today I kind of feel a lot more at home within the Academy on top of, well, it was not probably a critical factor in the decision, but I feel really part of a community here. So my training was in chemistry, but I really have an expertise in medicinal chemistry and drug discovery, which is really the idea of translating a biological concept into a new medicine. And I've been doing this for about 22 years now at the Walter Eliza Institute, WEHI in Melbourne. And as you were saying, I was really fortunate to be part of a fantastic drug discovery program developing a new drug. And it was a really fantastic experience. And now I'm the head of the New Medicines and Advanced Technology team at the Institute, which groups all the cutting-edge technologies that really enable high-impact research and translation at the Institute, and also all the platforms and the capabilities in drug discovery to translate our research as well. In addition to that, I'm also continuing drug discovery, also the chief scientific officer of a biotech company called Anaxis, and we're developing drugs for inflammatory diseases. And as you understand, I'm really passionate about translating science into new medicines, and advocating how we can fill the gaps in Australia that really enable the translation to make it smoother and easier for scientists to do this at the federal level is very important, and also breaking the barriers between industry, academia, and government to educate not only the public but also stakeholders to the complexity and the time it takes to develop a new drug to take it from idea all the way to market.
Thank you. Lara. Thanks, Kylie. I too feel really privileged to be here, and thank you to all the people that helped me get here along my career. I think in terms of what I'm doing now, I feel like the theme for my career has always been around technology and how that gets used for the environment and for customers. I did my university degree as an arts engineering. One stage I was very excited because I thought I might get the letters BA, BE and be a babe at the end of my name. But unfortunately, for many reasons, that wasn't the case. I got a BEng BA. But I think as part of that, the ability to study both engineering, geography, and for me, Japanese, the language, really has been something that I loved and I've tried to do throughout. Most of my career has been in the renewable energy area and energy efficiency on energy transition. And as Kylie mentioned earlier, I had the chance to lead the first strategy, the investment strategy for the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. I also co-founded a software as a service startup when the energy digital meters first came into Victoria. I was absolutely convinced that people would want to understand what their energy was half hour by half hour and then look to change it. That was certainly a great experience in terms of learning actually the level of interest in energy and also how the energy market actually operated, because it was fair to say with the dynamics we couldn't sell direct to customers and ended up selling that in a trade sale to a retailer. I then had the chance to work at Tesla Energy as their second employee into their Australian operations, and did a range of projects that I think aged me by about 10 years, but including the big battery in South Australia and a virtual power plant for public housing. And now I work in water, and I feel incredibly privileged to work in water now because a lot of my career has been focused on that energy transition. And I think what I hadn't understood is how closely behind the energy transition the water transition is coming. And maybe just a quick snapshot of that. If we look at the UN on a global basis, about 4 billion people have at least 1 month a year of water scarcity. And even if I bring it back down to where I am in Melbourne, we know by 2030 that we'll be about 85 gigalitres, which is probably just about 20% of what we use now short. And we also know in 2070 that about 75% of our water will be manufactured water. We can no longer rely on water falling from the sky to use. So we're going to need to shift to recycled water or desalination. And that transition to bring our community, industry and regulators with us is something that we focus on each day.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lara. David.
Well, we are yet another very diverse panel, it seems. Which is great. Actually, it really is, again, a tremendous honour to be welcomed to part of ATSE. So my thing is media compression, media coding, image coding, video coding, other kinds of media. I've been doing this for a very long time, ever since I got steered in that direction by my PhD supervisor way back in sort of the late 90s. But it's essentially what I do has given me an opportunity to interact with standards organizations. I've probably got about 5, 6 standards which are based upon technology that I've developed and other ones that I've had an opportunity to influence. Then there's the academic side, and then I started my own company, and then there's the whole commercialization side. I've been through the sort of IP lawsuit experience, which was at the wrong end of the stick, but it all came out well in the end. And recently had a lot of great successes in terms of translating the technology that we have into different industries. So my thing is really essentially the research translation angle, and I'm hoping to be able to speak a bit more about that today. I think in terms of the technology I've worked with, most you probably know, like 80% or so, probably more of the traffic carried by the internet would be media, compressed media. And the internet itself is consuming maybe a 4%, 5% of the global energy footprint. So it's not massive compared to what some people have been talking about, but it's still a big thing. And most of that is just pushed data. You receive your Netflix streaming content or whatever it might be. It's been customized for you, generated for you. There's 200 or 300 formats have been customized to different kinds of environments and just delivered on time. The technology that I develop focuses on reusable media. So essentially the media can be, once it's compressed, it can be consumed, it can be accessed in all kinds of different ways. So not surprisingly, that finds its way into all of those very high-end applications such as satellites, high-end medical applications, volumetric medical imagery, archival of enormous documents. The stuff we do is basically the de facto standard for cultural heritage preservation. and geospatial, defense, those kinds of areas. But essentially this reusability aspect is really important. And recently, some of the things that we developed actually now 10, 11, 12 years ago have been seen as critical to what's happening in health. So all kinds of interesting sides to the story about translating and the longevity of that translation process is what I'm interested in.
Thank you, David. Anna.
Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for attending today. It's really great to be on a stage and people interested in hearing what you have to say. It's wonderful. Thank you so much. And it's good to be on Nanowar Country today, too. So I'm founder and director of the ANU Institute for Space, which is a multidisciplinary institute at ANU. And we aim to solve society's greatest challenges through the use of our space technology, and we do that in partnership with government, industry, and communities. So 7 years ago, I moved back to Australia from Pasadena with my family, 3 Gen Alpha children. Apparently it's Gen Alpha now. I didn't know that even existed. So 3 Gen Alpha children and my very Gen X husband. And I did that because you don't get the opportunity to work in a new sector that's changing now, that's very real. And an old sector in this case that's changing the way it does business in its broadest sense. And that comes with lots of opportunities. And I think looking from the outside into Australia, you see things a tiny bit more objectively about the strengths of what it has to offer. And not just scientifically, but new challenges like climate adaptability, water, we've just heard, bushfire mitigation, communications, telehealth. And I saw that it was just too important to not come back and have a part of that journey and to help grow our new sector, I suppose, on the international stage. And lastly, in space, I hadn't set out to do this. It's funny, and yet one of the biggest impacts, if I may share with you, was realizing that I, as director of the Mount Stromlo facilities, and someone who was a career astronomer, I absolutely adore studying the universe and trying to figure out our place in it. It's a wonderful existence. And the translation knowledge that I had with me after 30 years of doing this, 30 years, my God, I realized that I could train a whole bunch of other leaders too, because I didn't need to know their discipline. I just needed to be able to walk them through what it means, the hurdles and challenges, and for them to be leaders of the future. And I think that's one of my greatest, the greatest pride I have about the Institute over the last 4 years is not just how we're, coming up with solutions to help Australia in the future, but also creating its next generation of leaders as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. And that's actually a really lovely segue, I think, into our first question. Obviously, we're here to talk about advancing technology for a better world, and really the overriding theme I think we've heard in all of the sessions so far today has been about the challenges immediately ahead of us, arising from the climate emergency. And we had the statement this morning that, if you're in a sector that doesn't think there's going to be any impact on you, you've just not thought about it yet. And so the first kind of 2-part question, recognising that we do have a diverse group of sectors on the stage here, the 2-part question I want to put to you all is really, what do you think are going to be the immediate impacts on your sector? But also, what is the most significant kind of technological opportunity that you think offers hope for sustainability in the future? Lara, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. So I think in terms of the first part of the question, what are our immediate challenges? The first is definitely the variability of the climate to our source product being water. So we are 20% down on average in terms of water into Melbourne's reservoirs. But the last 2 years we've had intense floods, as many of you would have seen, that really affected a number of communities. And that is the type of variability. Now that means one of our reservoirs may go offline at any stage due to bushfires or contaminations from floods. At the same time, what I've really seen at that personal level is the impact on our people. When I first arrived at South East Water, which has about 800 employees in the southeast of Melbourne, our employees used to really band together for incidents because they might happen twice a year. We had 18 last year in terms of reacting to storm events or floods or climatic events that affected our assets and therefore our services. And so what I see in terms of the impact is, yes, the impact on how we can supply our core product, but also that we need to think differently about our people because the role is changing in terms of the variability that they experience as well. In terms of that second part of the question, am I able to answer?
Yeah, okay.
Great. I think the exciting part about being in water is that there are technology solutions, and actually Australia is really at the forefront of a number of them. So in terms of the different sources that water can use, that's been well proven across the world in terms of recycled water and desalination. And so I'm not worried about the technology there, it's more how we bring our community with us. But one of the technologies that we're working at in our company and that we've just licensed overseas is a sensor that we can put into our meters that detects leaks. So across our network, we've got about 27,000 kilometres of pipes. The way that we currently understand there is a leak is that our customer rings up and says, what are you doing, there's a leak. Or we also have people that walk along with listening sticks to see and hear vibrations where there might be a leak. I absolutely did not believe that could possibly be true when I first came to South East Water, but that is how we detect a leak. And so this little sensor that we've been able to invent goes into a digital meter in a customer's home and actually measures the vibrations back down our network. And we've shown through some great work with some other engineering consultancies that we can use that now to detect leaks. It also helps on the customer side because it's detect leaks that they have as well, and through that we've saved a gigalitre of water. And that really has shown me that just like energy, I think we will confront a range of challenges in water before some other countries. And in a similar way, we should therefore be able to invent the type of technologies that can address them.
Fantastic. I think it's interesting that both parts of your answers there have a people element, and I think we've talked this morning as well about our need to work together with the humanities and social sciences to understand license and uptake going forward. David, would you like to kick off now?
Yeah, so climate sustainability is not something that you come across as a big factor in the kind of work that I do very much, but perhaps that's an issue because certainly very few people talk about the energy consumption associated with, whether it's digital media or the processing of that media. And in fact, we recently put together some hardware, and I was talking to some companies about this who are interested in purchasing it. And the first thing they say when we talk about energy, power efficiency and so forth, they say, well, no one really cares. Once this is the power envelope, you have that amount of power, it's all okay. That's maybe at a small scale. Of course, people are still thinking about green internet and green communications, but it still has a way to go. So I think that when that starts factoring down and we start having that as a major target, it might change some of the technology that we come up with. That's one thing. The other one is perhaps emergencies. Of course, climate creates, along with it, emergencies, and there's a lot of things to sustainability, maybe beyond just climate. But in terms of emergencies, one of the things that I just found out last week, as recently as last week, is that there's a massive interest in dealing with emergencies that can face, for example, aircraft control towers, bushfire-related emergencies. All these things can actually damage information and damage communication infrastructure and so forth. And building resilient communication infrastructure and backup systems that can actually keep track of the important data is really important. So that's also going to affect my area, like probably everyone's area.
Fantastic, thank you. Anna?
I could probably go into a few, so I think I'll just pick two, if you don't mind, that we're very interested in. So the first one is regarding back to climate adaptability again, but bushfires. But but our role in it is really a way to increase the warning time is to months rather than days or minutes. So we have a mission called Resilience, which is what's called a fuel load mission, and it's able to, at a continental scale, be able to work out essentially, it's a complicated piece of science, but what it's trying to do is to highlight those areas across a continent the size of Australia that are more susceptible to bushfires this season after. And so the question then is, if you're given that much information as a community, what can we do about it to minimize the devastating effects of what we've just been through? We were driving through fires from Merimbula back to Canberra. I'm sure many people, you're Australian, you know, you live and breathe bushfires, I'm sure. So they're getting worse, and we want to try and do something about it, but in a way that hasn't been done before. And the second one I wanted to highlight is maybe one you might not be as aware of, but it's very much on our minds, which is about sustainability, but applied to space. And so this very narrow orbit around the Earth, it's called low Earth orbit. The reason there's so many satellites there right now is because it's the cheapest place to get to, because it's not that much gravity shift. So that's why everyone wants to operate there. If you can do something there, you do it from a business perspective. But the issue is that there's only so much of that space that's available. And this is, 8 kilometer per second projectiles. Things don't explode at that speed. They just disintegrate. And things can get out of control. And so we're working with our space lawyers and our space regulators and our space engineers who are looking at developing new inventions for how do you nets and arms and things to grab space junk. I know it sounds out there, but it's very cool stuff. It's very important because we don't want to go down the same lessons we have, the same journey we have with this low Earth orbit environment, which is crucial to our future, as we have perhaps on Earth. We should know better.
Fantastic, thank you. And Guillaume?
So I would say that the impact is in the type of diseases that we have to consider. In particular, if we look at Australia but around the world, is to think what are the diseases that will appear in Australia that were not there before and that we have to now consider as part of the range of conditions we have to treat. So malaria was considered not endemic in Australia, might start appearing in the north, and etc. So obviously that's a more global health challenge that has to be resolved, but from an Australian perspective can become something that happens on our soil. So that can drive technology innovation in terms of new drugs and innovation in this area. And Alan Cowman in our institute is really at the forefront, for example, of malaria drug development. The other part is, and I think related to the video of the new fellow that was shown just before, is delivery and also access to that global health challenge that really is really important, and trying to develop new medicines that are efficacious but also cheap of access is a huge challenge. And for example, again with the malaria, cancer is a very good example. But in the malaria world, that is by definition an area where there is no return on investment. You have to sell your drug as less than $1 a pill, and that's the rule for this. And to have that kind of constraint really enables fantastic new modalities to reach people that really need it. And so I think thinking about how we can reach also low-income countries with new cancer target is also a big challenge here.
Excellent, thank you. Anna, you were talking about some of the regulatory innovation that we might need, and I think following this theme through about translation to implementation to outcomes, I just want to touch on that question really. A number of the themes we've heard about this morning, a number that you've mentioned today, really require novel methods in regulation, in policy development, actually agility in both of those things. And I wonder if you could just comment on where you see the opportunities there.
In
regulatory and policy change.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, my deputy is a lawyer and I'm a scientist, and I think my job's a lot easier, you know? It really is, but without the humanities sector and the legal sector, we just, as scientists, we can't deliver the impact we ever want to, you know? There's always a stumbling block you haven't really sorted through. So these are just perspectives I've just kind of thought about today when you asked me that question. But in my sector, the space sector, the frameworks and regulation are just valuable. And in fact, well, not just valuable, they underpin a sustainable presence in space in the future, full stop, end of conversation. And I think this is where a country like Australia, Canada as well, or others that don't have necessarily very large, I'm just going to say, a very large prime industries here established already. It means you can be a little bit more sort of bolder in setting the right way of how we do business in the future. There's nothing really holding you back there. So from a space relation perspective, setting norms and means on the international stage of how we really should do business. It's not just about the one transaction. What's the effect of what you're doing in this environment, for example? That really needs to be thought about. And I think if you start doing that, you start to do things like, well, you know, you can start ensuring what you're doing a lot more easier as well, right? Because you've already thought all those things through. And in Australia, we had an interesting period where, because there were 3 companies at least trying to do launch from Australia and working with Indigenous groups. And they spent a long time trying to understand that, you know, from an Indigenous, my understanding as a white person, part of Indigenous culture, it doesn't just stop at the land. It goes all the way into infinity. And they have a responsibility for everything that happens on their land all the way up to infinity. And so if you don't understand that to start with when you go into a conversation about launch, you're not being extremely respectful either. And this is where the humanities community came in to help. That's not really a very specific answer because it's everywhere in space and in regulation. But yes, there's a lot of innovation possible, I think, and especially for Australia and countries like it, which don't have such a bound prime industry government relationship, I would say.
No, that's great, and actually just, you know, connecting the dots. Of course, the Academy has this role in connecting expert advice to government to develop evidence-based policy. So again, I think it's one of the opportunities for all of us in the room to be thinking about the impact that you can have through the Academy to help accelerate implementation. And of course, another part of implementation is the multidisciplinary and the collaboration. Venture Clubs is a really great example of what's possible. Guillaume, I wonder if you could share with us your observations about what helps to make it work, some of the barriers.
Yes, so drug discovery is the quintessential, I think you mentioned that right at the start, it's the quintessential team science sport because it is very long, very complex, very challenging. It takes many, many scientists to come together from different angles to be able to really develop and optimize this small molecule that will become a drug that will be both efficacious, that will be able to reach where the disease is in our body and also be safe to be given. So this is a very complex problem that really requires teams that are assembled for the long term, that are adaptable, agile, that will change focus as the product is developed through that pipeline. So because this was a big part of probably the first 15 years of my scientific life here in Australia, this really has shaped how I see science in general. And I think it was mentioned this morning to think about the impact and how the milestone that we need to achieve in a program, whether it is a drug discovery program, but more broadly in science in general, and to assemble teams that are really enabling these outcomes or this impact to be achieved, and rather than thinking in a more traditional model of funding where it's separated across X number of CIs on a grant, and at the end nobody really gets a lot, and it's more about just collaborating rather than really achieving these long-term impact. So I think that's a really key aspect, and the funding landscape around this is changing a little bit, and for example, the MRFF has understands a little bit more these kind of programs that are long-term, that really are milestone-driven with long-term impact. So it is evolving, but the quantum of investment is also still lacking for drug discovery. This is, this is stated in the media that is in the order of $1.2 to $2 billion for each drug put on the market. That's obviously including all the failures that are associated with that, so it's not as much for each product. But it is a large amount of money that is very far from being reachable here in Australia, even in the early stage of the development. So I think there's still a lot of work to do to educate about that complexity and the amount of investment into even one program, and then to actually think about how do we build a sector here that can take things from the start all the way to the clinic and beyond here in Australia. It's been said again many times, the science here is absolutely stellar. There are new targets, new proteins, new ways of tackling disease that are discovered every year across Australia. So we have a huge opportunity to develop them into new, completely novel medicines, but we are lacking some of the steps to do this. So trying to build that pipeline is extremely important.
And we talked about effectively one of the production outputs of Australia is IP that's taken overseas, and it's kind of offshoring of IP. David, I wondered if you could comment. You talked about your IP challenges around the world.
Certainly, just one moment on the collaboration thing, because I think that in many areas we should think collaboration is just simply essential. We can't think it is always desirable, but in some areas it's completely essential. So for me, I found it's impossible, for example, to get international standardization without collaboration. And without that, you can't have interoperability. Without interoperability, there's no point in doing anything which involves communication. But then in terms of commercialization and getting ideas from the research table into actual practice, there again, collaboration is absolutely essential. I have a very interesting story. We were working on technology which was originally taken up by Defence for interactive imaging. It's used in the field in some places that I probably wouldn't even know. But recently, a very visionary individual who worked through many different companies and finally wound up in Amazon Health, leading their activities, AWS Health, is a very visionary individual. And we've worked with many of them, but when one of them gets into the right position, everything starts to change. And so having collaboration with people who, it's not just we often complain about industry, they don't take up ideas, or we have trouble translating things. It's actually about people. It's very often about finding the right person and someone who really has the kind of energy and the insight. It's not just about having insight at the research phase, but also all the way along the pipeline. The other thing along that translation pipeline that I want to say is that at every stage of translating an invention from something you might write a paper about to something which becomes a reality, at every stage there are many challenges. Challenge, of course, is the mother of invention, and that means that there's intellectual property at every one of those stages. So in Australia, we love property, right? We've got a bit of a love affair with property, but intellectual property is therefore something that we should be extremely interested in. And how do you own intellectual property? It's by undertaking challenges. And so what we really should be trying to do within the Australian mindset, and maybe as ATSE, is to encourage as much as possible industry and maybe even other entities besides just universities to be taking on major challenges. And that is actually a policy issue, I think, how to create a framework which will work with often the business models or the funding models that many companies have to encourage them to actually take on major challenges rather than just trying to buy a solution from somewhere. Because it's in that we can give birth to those visionary individuals and create a lot of intellectual property all the way down the pipeline.
Fantastic, thank you. Just very quickly, my final question. I wanted to talk a little bit about the multidisciplinary aspects. You know, there's lots of examples where the basic science research actually went, you know, into a completely different sector in terms of delivering benefit. And Anna, you've talked about, you know, taking your learnings from energy and Lara, from energy and storage into water. What do you think are some of the challenges, and how do you really make people kind of see the benefits of working with people that they don't ordinarily, so that you can get that kind of cross-sector impact?
Yeah, I think the first lesson that a good mentor taught me was never rule yourself out. So for me, even when this rolling water came out, clearly I've got no water background, I really do think there are people paid to rule me out from a recruitment process, so why would I rule myself out? And I do think that that is part of the approach to, I love the word, I think it was Alistair's, transdisciplinary approach. Like, often we rule ourselves out and think, I'm not sure I'd have something to add to that, or not as much as someone else. Where often it's that different opinion or different voice, as we all know around the table, that changes how you think. So for me personally, it's been always trying not to rule myself out. And then in terms of it, I'm amazed each time, even on this panel, actually the similarities and some of those links in terms of hearing Anna describe that regulation and actually having a lawyer as her second in charge. And I think we should be thinking more around that. What is that right team around the table? It's probably not a team that looks like ourselves in many ways, not just the basis of our education, but also the communities or the stories that we bring. I think there's a general understanding of that now. It's how we actually deliver it.
Thank you. I have to apologise because I've done a terrible job of managing time here. So I'm going to suggest we're going to have to go to questions over the coffee break. In one sentence to leave us, could you share with me what your view is going to be the most profound impact of technology on our world in the next decade? Guillaume.
Well, in new drug modalities that are really taking advantage of our own biology to actually direct disease or direct proteins to cure diseases, and genetic approaches and delivery will be really big, profound changes.
I don't think it'll be technology as such. I think it'll be our ability to communicate with customers and our community around what it can mean for them and why they should come on the journey with us. So I think that will be the key.
Fantastic. David?
Well, the hardest part about technology forecasting is it's almost always wrong. So if I pick something like the usual things today, like AI, autonomous vehicles and so forth, maybe that'll be a thing of the, not such a significant thing. I actually personally, therefore, would like to say I would love to see the future being technology development which enhances autonomy and diversity, rather than focusing us all down into a funnel. And maybe that could be something to think about.
I would like to see us come together to find, with various technologies, and especially for Australia, Indigenous knowledge of land management and response, to wrap that into how we are going to manage climate adaptability.
Fantastic. That's a lovely final word. Please join me in thanking and congratulating